What's going on, everybody? It's A. Nicholsworth right here on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all that other good stuff. What else are we on here? Is that it? I don't know. I got to check every day. You got to check with the production team, make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. I appreciate folks for joining me on the show tonight. Of course, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, social media, everywhere at Keaton D. Nichols. And if you're looking for a great place to follow the show, you can check out anchor.fm/A Nicholsworth, just like my last name, anchor.fm/A Nicholsworth. Happy Monday out there to everybody. I hope everyone had a great Monday. We're going to get started right in here with the headlines. We're going to talk about some racism happening across the pond in England. Yeah, happening with the English soccer team. I'm not really like a Euro League, UEFA. I don't know if it's the same thing. Euro League soccer. This is Euro League soccer that this happened. The Euro 2020 League Championships. That's what we'll talk about. But first, we got to get some American politics out the way. A couple of rules before we get going. Make sure you remember, leave your comments in the comment section. I will put them on the screen if you're watching via one of the appropriate mediums. If you're on Instagram, I'll read your comment for you as well. Make sure you check out our folks as well who are supporting. Appreciate their efforts as well. And let's get started. All right. Today's headlines, of course, sponsored by Parkour Therapy. Go to parkourtherapy.com. Use the promo code ANW2021. You get 10% off your entire purchase, not just some of your purchase, your entire purchase on the website. All right. The first headline coming up today, coming out of Politico. I saw this in Politico's blog that they run. I think it's called like the Rundown or whatever else like that. But this certainly caught my eye. And the headline says, the death of Defund the Police. Yikes. It seemed like we had so much momentum there going for a while, but the concept has been under fire for a little bit. And I did wonder, president who was sympathetic to the idea of reforming police, but not necessarily sympathetic to the idea of defunding the police. Where exactly would he stand on this, and where exactly would the movement sort of go after that point? Well, I think that today we kind of got a kind of clear-cut answer as to what direction this whole conversation is headed. Today, we found out a few things that are important to this conversation. The first thing is that at an event with Attorney General Merrick Garland today, President Joe Biden reinforced, I guess you could say, the idea that he's against defunding the police, even suggesting today that we should be giving local departments more federal funding to help quell the recent surge, let's say, in crime. And he's going to use money from the historic rescue plan. It's something that the Democrats have been very happy to sort of tout in this idea that, look, they want to spend a bunch of money on the country, infrastructure, and other things as well. COVID relief and all this other stuff. Like, that's kind of like the big plan. But this is going to be an interesting part of it as we continue to dissect all the things that are going to be included as a part of the spending. This is one of the things that Biden wants to do. There was a memo that was released today, and in case you missed the memo, literally, the memo was titled How Local and State Government Can and Should Use the President's Gun Crime Reduction Strategy and Historic Rescue Plan funding to improve public safety. This was rich. This was pretty cool. Pretty cool as in interesting. Interestingly cool. The memo kind of lays out a few things specifically that Joe Biden and this administration would like to address with this funding. And a few of those things say stem the flow of firearms used to commit violence. This is all a part of the memo. You all can read it on your own. I'll leave the link. But anyway, stem the flow of firearms used to commit violence. Support local law enforcement with federal tools and resources. In other words, giving local law enforcement money in so many ways. Invest in evidence-based community violence interventions, whatever that means. Expand summer program and employment opportunities for youngsters and also the formerly incarcerated. These are just some of the things that this plan sort of lays out. And that kind of sounds cool. That kind of sounds fine. But whenever you start thinking of it as an alternative to defunding the police, not just literally taking money away from the police, but the ideas that were behind defund the police, you start to become a little underwhelmed with what we're seeing here in front of us. The memo goes on to list some examples of what some cities plan on doing with some of this money, and just listen to this. Utica, New York, I'll just read a few of them. Utica, New York, it says, according to this memo, plans to support, quote, gun violence prevention and law enforcement career recruiting efforts. Okay? Plans to support gun violence prevention and law enforcement career recruiting efforts. They're going to add more police. That's what they're saying there. Walla Walla, Washington will, quote, fund new police hires. There's nothing veiled about that one. That one's pretty straightforward. Cincinnati, Ohio is using rescue plan funds to increase its policing and emergency services budget. Increase the policing and emergency services budget. I could go on. Philadelphia, PA, city I used to live in, is spending $1.3 million to expand proven violence interruption programs. I don't even know what a proven violence interruption program is, but if it's proven and it has truly interrupted the violence in a city like Philadelphia, you would think that they would be using these programs and these strategies a little bit more. But anyway, $1.3 million is going to be added to the expansion of said programs in Philadelphia. And $2 million for a transitional jobs program to address the root cause of violence, lack of job opportunities. That's what it says here. They say that a core concept, a core reason for some of the violence that we see in a city like Philadelphia is a lack of job opportunities. Something in and of itself, like, I don't know, kind of bothers me, like this concept that the people that are out there committing crime wouldn't be committing crime if they had a 9-to-5. Like, that's all it takes, right? Like a little bit of elbow grease and hard work. I think statements like that show that they understand, that certain politicians and certain leaders understand some of the facets behind the situation. They understand some of the data behind the situation, yet they don't quite have a good grip on how to solve that issue yet. Or they have a good grip on how to solve it, they're just unwilling to do that. Because some of the things laid out on this list sound exactly like what we're hearing here on Instagram. The Artist Key says, sounds like funding the police. Yeah, because that's exactly what it is. That's 100% what it is. Now, here's the thing. We kind of knew ahead of time that Joe Biden wasn't on board with the whole defund the police concept. Now, we knew this ahead of time, right? Like, this shouldn't be a surprise that we're arriving to this at this point. But what we're talking about is, as a concept, defunding the police never officially died out. It just kind of got ignored for a little while. It got kind of pushed to the back burner as the conversation about George Floyd seemingly took a different turn. At that split in the road where we had the option to sort of dig deeper into the concept of defunding the police, which really has much less to do with taking money away from police departments and a lot more with to do with reforming said police departments. But when we had an opportunity to go further down that road in the conversation about George Floyd last year, we decided to take the other road. We decided to take the, let's table this discussion and come back to it later. Increasing the chances that we are going to indeed come back to this conversation later through another grotesque and gruesome situation that we're going to have to see in the news. That's, to me, what the decision that they made. You know, Joe Biden was a selected, he was the candidate, rather, that the Democrats wanted to select for this position for a reason. That he was going to be, he's the kind of guy that's not going to ruffle enough feathers on the other side of the aisle. A part of the Democratic strategy in 2020 had to be to take back, if you will, some of the votes that they lost in 2016 to the people that sympathize, not necessarily with, if they don't sympathize with Trump, they certainly sympathize with things that are kind of close to Trump. And police and Trump, very close. You have to go a long way down the line, the list of top Democrats, if you will, before you find one that is bold enough and open enough to support the concept of defunding the police. Again, the concept, not the actual idea, literal idea of it, but the concept of defunding the police. You got to go way down the ranks before you find a Democrat that's confident enough to say that that's what they support. And there's a reason for that. Now, Democrats will typically be on the side of those who are usually pushing for police reform. There's many arguments out there, but for the concepts, right, for the conceptual belief here, Democrats are pro-black. They're pro police reform, and they're anti-police brutality. These are things that are easy to be on the right side of. That's what the Democrats are. But when it comes to reform, are they in a position where they are pro-reform? It's not just about saying, okay, what Democrat is bold enough to say that they want to take money away from the police. That's not what defunding the police is always about. But are there, significant, if you will, Democrats that are willing to say, yeah, I support that notion and we should talk about this? If so, the party certainly doesn't want to show that it is in any way, shape, or form interested in heading in that direction. That's what we heard today. What we heard today was a stamping out, if you will, of the concept of defunding the police. That whole defund the police thing, let's knock that out, okay? What we're going to try and do is we're going to try and satisfy everybody here, right? We're going to satisfy the people who lean to the right or are on the right by promising that we are going to, instead of defunding our police, we are going to show that we are the party that supports our police department. Now, of course, everybody supports their police department. That goes without saying, right? Like, we all want good police. We all want responsible police. Of course. But now when we start to open up this argument and we start to open up this can of worms, if you will, the Democrats have to be on the side also of supporting the police and showing that they support the police. They are on the side of reform, but they're also on the side of police. Those two things don't naturally sort of line up. And so it creates this sort of awkward conflict when we discuss this defunding the police thing, because from my perspective, I think defund the police is a bad idea for Democrats, but not because it's conceptually a bad idea, but it's a bad idea for their optics. Knowing what a Democrat has to do to win elections, knowing what monies have to be collected, what palms have to be greased, if you will. Knowing all of these things, I say to myself, if a Democrat wants to make it in the Democrat world here in America, supporting defund the police for any politician, but Democrats especially, is not such a hot idea. Which opens up, another conversation about, can Democrats really bring about the kind of reform politically, bring about the kind of reform that needs to happen in this country, a lot of the reform that we've been pushing for a long time. It's just an interesting question. Now, here's another form of pressure on the other side. On Monday, former President Donald J. Trump said on Fox and Friends, that's a show that happens on Fox News, as a part of this long interview, he said a bunch of things here, but one of the thing that related to police here, he said, is that you have to give police back their authority, pointing out that violent crime was surging in major U.S. cities. And this becomes also a pressure point for Democrats on the other side of this. Donald Trump is out of the picture, as we talked about a few shows later, in that he can't communicate with his base the same way via social media. It's a major key here, but Donald Trump is still around. He's still a thing, and not just a thing. For the Democrats, he still is for the Republicans, rather. For the Republicans, he still is the thing. He is the engine that is driving any momentum that the right, if you will, has right now. And they both love and hate that at the same time. Donald Trump is a serious 2024 candidate. I know that sounds kind of weird and strange, but having lived through the 2016 election cycle, I'm not willing to rule anything out. Donald Trump, again, I'll say this, is a serious 2024 candidate for the Republicans. He's trying to stay as relevant as he can. He made these comments over the weekend at CPAC Dallas, which I guess is like, CPAC like midway through the year. I know they have one at the beginning of the year. I guess they refresh their CPAC gills, if you will, in July to make sure that they're still really conservative. But anyway, he's invited to speak. He speaks for over an hour talking about the former president. So he holds still a significant position. And if he, on the right, is saying, hey, our country's going to hell in a handbasket, right? The crime is through the roof, which statistically that is somewhat true, right? Crime, we have experienced an uptick in crime over the last couple of years. How much of that is his administration's fault? a separate conversation. But for the sake of this particular argument, yes, crime is up. And for the party in power right now, the Democrats, it's not a good look. And it is of no coincidence that at a time when I felt, especially last year building up into this year, that we were building a lot of momentum in this conversation about police reform, and that we might have actually been getting somewhere where we can actually make changes in society that will make a lasting impact, real changes. Not like, oh, you can't choke people out anymore, right? Like, that's not a real change. It's a reactive change, right? So right on the cusp of this real change, here comes this issue. Oh no, the country is so horribly gripped with this problem of crime that now, instead of the conversation going the way of trying to come up with alternatives or replacements for the way that we do policing now, instead now the pendulum has swung the other way, and it's not the conservatives who have done it. At the head of this train, the engineer of this locomotive is Joseph R. Biden, this Amtrak locomotive. And he's driving it straight towards the idea of more policing. Is the concept of defund the police a bad idea? Is the question that is on the screen right now. No, it is not a bad idea. Coming up with alternatives to the way that we do policing, I think, is a necessary part of our human society here in this country, something that has gotten as out of control, if you will, as the violence itself. The policing reflects, I don't know if it reflects the violence itself, but there's some sort of symbiotic relationship that exists in America between the high levels of crime and the highly aggressive policing too. So something's got to give. When the next situation, and unfortunately I have to say, when the next situation happens where police overstep their bounds as officers and endanger or kill or hurt someone because of those actions, we are going to come back around to these same conversations about what do we do here. See, we're not in a cycle at this particular moment. If we're not in the midst of a cycle where somebody just got shot and killed by a police officer, or somebody captured a part of it on camera or something else like that. We're not in the midst of one of those cycles. It's still happening, but it is what it is. So in moments like this, how do we approach this subject? Well, the concept of defunding the police, in other words, the concept of reforming police at a very core level, is done. Dunsico Burris. No one in the line of Democrat leadership is going to pursue this. Not Joe Biden, not Kamala Harris, not Nancy Pelosi, not Chuck Schumer, none of the significant Clyburn, none of the significant Democrats are going to take a swipe at this, which means for the next 4 to 8 years, the Democrats, who are the most powerful Democrats in the country, the only party, the Democrats, that will even hear issues like this out, is unlikely, in my eyes, to make significant moves on reforming police for the next 4 to 8 years. Just saying, be prepared for that. Be prepared for that. If defunding the police, the other thing to pull out of this before we move on, right? If defunding the police is off the table, and this is a question that I'll extend to everyone out there too, but if defunding the police is off the table, what then do we move into? What then, what is the next movement, if you will, that's going to push us to some sort of reform? Because right now, defund the police was like the only thing we had going. It was a flawed message in terms of its delivery. Sure. We talked about that before. But this is as close as we seemingly are going to get. Cities like Minneapolis that were seemingly right on the edge of this sort of reform are now not going to have that federal support. You don't have an administration from the top down that is saying these changes aren't just nice to think about. These changes are necessary. We don't have that. And as far as I'm concerned, if the Democrats have their way, another Democratic administration will follow this one. And none of the leadership is going to be willing to take that on. So what's the next step? I mean, maybe you like this plan and this idea of kind of inserting millions and millions and billions in some cases of dollars into programs that, as they say, fund new police hires in Walla Walla, Washington. in Albuquerque, New Mexico, rather, investing $3 million to expand a gunshot detection system. Gunshot detection? What? $5 million to refurbish station houses. $1 million for new cars. I'm not talking about like to cruise around. I'm talking police cars, right? So this is the idea from the Democrats. Not defund the police. They want to fund the police. Is more police? Is that the solution to an uptick in crime? Let me know what you think. Got a couple comments in. The artist Key says, "Boo! Except they won't pay a living wage." Yeah, that too. We've had the wage conversation before. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. As well, Dems are too weak. She also says, it's ridiculous. There's a couple things that kind of bothered me about the last 4 years for Democrats is that they wasted time. They had quite possibly one of the most, I don't know if you want to call them polarizing or politically inept creatures to ever find their way to, leadership of a country. And they spent their 4 years basically dedicating themselves to doubling down on the attacks on Donald Trump, trying to make Donald Trump look bad in the eyes of people that didn't look at him as a bad thing. I think the Democrats made a huge mistake focusing so much of their energy in the past 4 years on trying to make Donald Trump look bad. It was always my argument that, look, man, if you have to try and make Donald Trump look bad, then whoever you're talking to, you're wasting your breath. If they can't see the fallacies of Donald Trump's leadership, then I don't think that's worth your time. And instead of grappling with the idea that the country had indeed shifted politically, and that there were a lot of people that were sympathetic to ideas that were arguably anti-American, instead of gripping and dealing with the fact that was in that status, instead the Democrats continually tried to smooth that over with, no, this country is really good. This country is fine. We just need a different leader. We made a mistake here by electing this leader, and the only thing that we have to do is get him out of here as soon as possible. Let's impeach him. Let's try and sling mud at him, whatever we have to do, right? And in those 4 years, the Democrats are no better of a party than they were 4 years ago. Maybe conceptually they stand still on the right side of history with all this stuff, but they're no better a party than what we saw 4 years ago. And that's disappointing too, Slim. Yes, that's disappointing, in a sense too, because you don't really have any other sort of political allies in this fight. There is no third party that, sort of becomes relevant in this conversation, unfortunately. And so it really is up to the Democrats, who, as you say, I agree with that. They've been really weak on this subject. And what are they willing to do? What are the Democrats really willing to do other than say, hey, our vote is better than no vote? I don't know how much political capital that was. I was holding my breath last election, hoping that strategy would work. I don't think it works again, though. As I said, Trump is a serious 2024 candidate. I think the people on the right, if you will, conservatives right now, the new conservatives, as I call them, Trump conservatives, I think they'd be thrilled to hear about Trump running in 2024. I think they would be highly disappointed as well to hear anyone else is running for president in 2024. Like anybody else. It would be a tremendous disappointment. So I think the Democrats got to decide who they're going to be here. Don't decide what you're not going to be. Decide who you actually are going to be. That's a lot more interesting to me, at least. Let's get to a quick commercial break. Coming up on the other side, I'll talk about my other story of the day, which happened in soccer, football, the English kind. Don't go anywhere. A quick break, and then we'll be back on the other side with more of a Nichols Worth.
Hi, I'm Houston Bernard. Hardcore Athletic is apparel with a purpose. We're out to save the world and promote awareness for all ailments and disability.
When you do what you love, you're forever young, and you'll never, 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 never grow old. You'll never, 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 never grow old.
All right, right, welcome back into a Nichols Worth. Got my Instagram folks at Keaton D Nichols on Instagram is where you can follow and watch the show live on Instagram. If you kind of like being on the phone a little bit more, that's totally cool. You can always watch the replay elsewhere and catch up on the podcast form of the show at anchor.fm/A Nichols Worth. We're also available on Spotify. You can get both of those links right from there. Appreciate folks for joining me here on the program. And we were just talking a little bit about violence prevention and Joe Biden, a lot of these ideas coming together upon this balancing teeter that is fund the police or not to fund the police. Where the Democrats going to go on this, I think the president showed today what the direction of the party will be, and it is not in any way, shape, or form to defund the police, and it is of course to fund the police, the polar opposite of what many activists on the ground have been clamoring for quite some time. So with the idea that the Democrats are now on this idea of funding police, and that's setting a tone across the rest of the country, where do you think the movement goes from here? Where do you think the movement for reforming police, where do you think that goes from here? Because at this point, I don't really see a bright future in the next 4 to 8 years. Also, who's going to be the president? This is kind of an unrelated thing, but while I'm here, I'm just looking at this. I mean, 4 years from now, Joe Biden is going to be older. That's just the way that time works, from what I understand. And so to envision an 83-year-old Joe Biden running for his second term as president, I mean, you have some senators and some Congress people that are pretty old as well. But I don't know. It just doesn't excite me at all. The concept of an 83-year-old running for president. I don't care what political party they necessarily represent. Intellect commenting in, he's got some new music out right now. You should check out too. Intellect88 on Instagram says you should start a YouTube channel as well, bro. I got my YouTube channel up and popping right now for the folks who want to check it out. YouTube.com/A Nichols Worth. YouTube.com/A Nichols Worth. I'm getting my production game up. I'm speaking with the production department, which is a department of me, myself, and I. So, yeah, we're working on the higher class productions for the YouTube channel, but I appreciate that, Intellect, and go check out Intellect's music. And also, for Sunday morning painting, that's 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Sunday mornings. It's actually a really relaxing and awesome program. But the artist also says, I can't see myself voting for Kamala Harris or Kamala Harris. I'm not really, it's Kamala Harris. I can't see myself voting for her either. But but not in like a mean way, not like, oh, I hate her, she's the worst. She's just a really non-inspiring figure. And I think a lot of the reports, like I haven't really talked about it too much on the show because I don't want to necessarily just kind of report on it or talk about it in a silo as if to sort of attack Kamala Harris. I don't really have a good reason to attack Kamala Harris, but there have been some negative reports out of her office. Her chief of staff, of course, running into some issues with kind of keeping that office together. And, you know, basically people kind of, you know, following up on this concept that she's kind of hard to work with. I don't think that those stories necessarily do her all that much good. But anyway, it's just the condition that the Democrats are in right now. It'll be interesting. I don't want to jump too far ahead of myself with the 2024 talk, but I definitely think that, you know, if Trump is spry enough and he's feeling good enough physically, then I think he runs in 2024. I don't really see another alternative. I think that's what conservatives want. The new conservatives want him. And whether or not the Democrats are going to have a response for that, who knows? Who knows? Who knows? Let me know what you think in the comment section. I appreciate everyone for chiming in. Let me get to my second story. And I saw this just as a wrap before we get out of here. I wanted to talk about this, is that racist attacks, this is out of VOA, racist attacks on England's black soccer players condemned. What is this all about? So let me pull up my story on this because I don't really know too much about Euro soccer. Excuse me, I don't really know too much about American soccer for that matter. Excuse me, I'm a baseball guy. I know some of you all probably want to get off and watch the home run derby, so I'm going to wrap this up. By some of you all, I mean me. The Euro 2020 soccer final between Italy and England happened yesterday. Now the game goes into extra time. Apparently it's a pretty crazy game from what I understand. I did not watch it, but apparently it was a pretty crazy game. And at the end of the day, this article says Italy won in a shootout 3-2 when 3 of England's black players missed their spot kicks, which I guess are like, kind of like penalty kicks, bonus kicks at the end to help determine the outcome. A barrage of racist attacks on social media followed, which led England's Football Association to release a statement Monday morning condemning the racist abuse of its players. Twitter reacted and allegedly removed some tweets and some accounts that had come at these players, calling them all types of racist racial epithets and things like that. It was really ugly. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who is like the other side of the Donald Trump coin, on the other side of the pond, as we like to say, he commented on Twitter saying, "This England team deserves to be lauded as heroes, not racially abused on social media," adding that those responsible for this appalling abuse should be ashamed of themselves. This is obviously like something that's really terrible and that shouldn't happen anywhere. But it also reminded me, not the situation, but the response kind of reminded me of what happens when this kind of thing happens in the United States, because it definitely happens in the United States all the time. Most recently, there's a really good article in The Undefeated that you should check out, written by CC Sabathia. He's a black pitcher for the Yankees and the Brewers and the Indians, a bunch of teams. But he talked about, kind of not feeling like he could fully be black in his environment there, in so many words. And I'm tremendously, paraphrasing the article. You should check it out and read the full commentary of what he said. But that's in so many words what he said. It's kind of tough to be black or a person of color on these teams, these sports teams, when you're surrounded not only by white teammates, but also a majority white fans as well. So even though this is soccer, this is happening across again, the Atlantic Ocean, all the way over there in Europe. The response to this story reminded me a lot of what happens in the United States, that, seemingly these individuals sort of pop up off of Twitter or wherever else like that, and they yell racist things, or they hold up racist signs, or racial attacks are thrown at players of color in these different sports. And the reaction typically is from the association of the sport, like the league or the leadership around the country seems to be the same. This is terrible. This shouldn't have happened. These people shouldn't be abused. They should be praised. This is the wrong thing. This doesn't represent the country as a whole. And it just is a reminder that not only is racism, a global sport, if you will, no pun intended here, but it's a global thing. American racism certainly has its fine points of specificity, if you will, but racism as a whole, colorism as a whole, is a global issue. When we saw last year that people across the pond, again, I just love saying that phrase, but across the pond and everywhere else in the world were joining in unison or in solidarity, if you will, with American protesters that were saying enough is enough regarding George Floyd. Other countries reacted to that, not because it was the cool, trendy thing to do, but other countries experience forms of racism that look and sound and feel and play out almost the same way that American racism does as well. So it's a reminder that the issues that we deal with here are not necessarily specifically because these Americans are just so nasty and disgusting. But, understanding racism, of course, as a global issue forces you to pay attention in a different way. I hope these gentlemen who play for this team, I hope they are able to get, some help if necessary, or to talk to somebody if they're feeling some sort of pressure after this event. Things like this happen, but it doesn't mean that we should normalize this kind of thing or just say, oh, well, that's how things are. That's how things go. I think here in the United States, as bad as things are racially, that we actually do have an opportunity to set a standard, both for the way we push back against things like that and for what we say that we allow as a country. Some things might seem draconian or might seem like we're going too far as a way of trying to eradicate this stuff from happening in our society. But believe me, it doesn't go far enough when you consider that it happens time and time and time again all over the place. So keeping that in mind, that's all I got for today. I will be back tomorrow at 8 p.m. with another fresh edition of A Nichols Worth. Make sure you check out anchor.fm/A Nichols Worth. Become a monthly subscriber to the show. Now that we are on every day, your donations would, of course, be greatly appreciated. You can catch that link right there at the bottom of the screen, anchor.fm/A Nichols Worth, the best way to keep up with the show. I'm at Keaton D. Nichols on social medias. Make sure you all take care of yourself. I'll see you guys tomorrow at 8 o'clock.